Hello, and welcome back to the episode 7 of our daily podcast. And as usual, I'm not alone. Alex is with me. How are you doing, Alex?
Hello, Sarah. Thank you. I'm doing well. And dear audience, I have a quick reminder. If you are new, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
I've been thinking a lot about the word transparency. The more I hear it, the more I realize that people use it very confidently, but they rarely stop to explain what it actually means.
I feel the same way. Transparency sounds simple on the surface, but once you start thinking about it seriously, you realize it touches many areas of life. Communication, trust, leadership, even personal relationships.
Exactly. And I think that's why this word deserves more than a short definition. It needs space, it needs explanation.
Yes, transparency is one of those concepts that cannot be understood from one angle only. It changes meaning depending on context, power, responsibility, and intention.
At its core, transparency refers to clarity and openness in communication and action. It means that information is not hidden, distorted, or intentionally made confusing. When something is transparent, people can see what is happening, understand why decisions are made, and trust that there is no hidden agenda behind words or actions. However, transparency is not just about sharing information. It is about how information is shared. Clear language, honest explanations, and consistency between words and actions are all part of transparency. A message can be technically true, but still lack transparency if it avoids important details or uses vague language to protect power or authority. This is why transparency is closely connected to trust. When people experience transparent communication, they feel respected and included. When transparency is missing, uncertainty grows, and uncertainty often turns into fear, suspicion, or disengagement.
I really like that point that something can be true but still not transparent.
Yes, because transparency is not only about facts, it's about access to understanding.
Many people confuse transparency with honesty, but they are not exactly the same. Honesty focuses on truthfulness, not lying. Transparency goes further. It asks whether the truth is communicated in a way that others can understand and use meaningfully. For example, a leader might say, "We are restructuring the organization." This sentence may be honest, but it is not transparent. Transparency would involve explaining what restructuring means, how it will affect people, and why the decision is necessary. Without that explanation, honesty exists, but transparency does not. This distinction is especially important in professional and academic contexts. Transparency requires responsibility. It means recognizing that your words affect others and that clarity is not optional when power or authority is involved.
In institutions such as governments, universities, and organizations, transparency plays a critical role. Transparent institutions clearly explain their rules, decisions, and processes. People know how systems work, how decisions are made, and what rights and responsibilities they have. When transparency is weak, corruption, inequality, and abuse of power become more likely. This is why transparency is often discussed together with accountability. If actions are visible and understandable, they can be questioned. If they are hidden, they cannot. In academic English, you often see transparency discussed in a neutral, analytical tone. For example, transparency strengthens public trust. Lack of transparency leads to institutional failure. Learning to recognize this language helps advanced learners understand academic texts more deeply and participate confidently in discussions about governance, ethics, and policy.
It's interesting how transparency sounds moral, but it's also very practical.
Yes, it's not idealistic. It actually makes systems work better.
Transparency is not only important in large systems, it is equally important in personal relationships. In friendships, transparency means expressing thoughts and emotions honestly while still being respectful and thoughtful. When people avoid transparency, misunderstandings grow silently. Small issues become emotional distance. Transparency allows people to address problems early, explain intentions, and rebuild trust when something goes wrong. However, transparency in relationships does not mean sharing everything. It means sharing what is necessary for mutual understanding. Healthy transparency respects boundaries while still prioritizing honesty and clarity.
Emotional transparency is one of the hardest forms of transparency. It requires self-awareness and courage. Being emotionally transparent means acknowledging your feelings and expressing them clearly, instead of hiding behind silence or indirect communication. Many people avoid emotional transparency because they fear conflict or rejection. But over time, lack of emotional transparency can damage relationships more than honest discomfort. When emotions are clearly expressed, others can respond with understanding instead of confusion. For English learners, emotional transparency is also a language skill. It involves learning phrases that express feelings clearly and respectfully, rather than aggressively or vaguely.
In professional settings, transparency is widely seen as a sign of maturity, credibility, and strong leadership. Transparent professionals do not rely on authority alone. Instead, they communicate expectations clearly, explain goals and priorities, and make sure that people understand not only what is required, but why it matters. This approach reduces confusion and helps teams work with greater confidence and alignment. Giving honest feedback is another important aspect of professional transparency. Transparent feedback is specific, respectful, and constructive. It does not hide problems, but it also avoids unnecessary harshness. When feedback is transparent, employees know where they stand and what they need to improve, which creates a healthier and more productive work environment. Transparency also becomes especially important when decisions affect others. Rather than simply enforcing rules or changes, transparent leaders take time to explain the reasoning behind their decisions. Even when people disagree, understanding the logic and constraints involved makes decisions easier to accept and trust. In business and leadership English, transparency often appears in formal, strategic language. You might encounter sentences such as, "Transparent communication improves efficiency by reducing misunderstandings and delays." We aim to maintain transparency across all departments to support collaboration and accountability. Transparency builds long-term trust with stakeholders, including employees, partners, and clients. Notice how these sentences focus on outcomes, systems, and relationships. This is typical of professional English, where transparency is treated as a practical tool rather than an abstract ideal. Using the word transparency correctly in these contexts signals more than vocabulary knowledge. It shows that you understand professional values such as responsibility, clarity, and ethical communication. For advanced English learners, mastering this kind of language helps you sound thoughtful, reliable, and confident in academic and workplace discussions.
The more we talk about transparency, the more it becomes clear that it is not a fixed personality trait. It is not something you either have or don't have. Transparency is a practice, something you choose again and again through your actions, your communication, and your willingness to be open. Some people assume that transparency depends on being naturally confident or outspoken. In reality, even quiet or reserved people can be highly transparent. What matters is not how much you speak, but how clearly and honestly you communicate when it matters. Transparency shows up in small decisions, explaining a delay instead of staying silent, admitting uncertainty instead of pretending to know everything, or sharing context instead of giving vague answers. Because transparency is a practice, it can be developed over time. People learn to be more transparent as they gain experience, self-awareness, and emotional maturity. It often requires courage, because being transparent means accepting the risk of misunderstanding, criticism, or vulnerability. However, over time, this practice strengthens trust and improves relationships, both personal and professional. Understanding transparency as a practice also helps English learners. You don't need perfect language to be transparent. Simple, clear sentences often communicate more transparency than complex vocabulary. What matters most is the intention to be open, honest, and understandable. When learners focus on clarity rather than perfection, their communication becomes more confident and more authentic.
Yes, and it's a practice that requires effort. Being vague is easy. Being clear takes courage.
Transparency asks us to slow down in a world that often rewards speed and shortcuts. Instead of rushing through conversations or giving quick answers, transparency encourages us to pause and consider how our words will be received. It reminds us that communication is not only about what we say, but about what others understand. When we choose transparency, we take time to explain our thoughts, decisions, and intentions clearly. We do not assume that others already know the background or context. We recognize that people come from different experiences, levels of knowledge, and emotional states. Clear explanations reduce confusion and prevent unnecessary misunderstandings. Transparency also requires responsibility. When our words are misunderstood, transparency invites us to clarify rather than defend ourselves. It encourages us to reflect on whether we communicated clearly enough instead of placing all the blame on the listener. This sense of responsibility strengthens trust and shows respect for others. For English learners, this idea is especially important. Transparent communication does not depend on complex grammar or advanced vocabulary. It depends on clarity, patience, and awareness. When learners focus on being understood rather than sounding perfect, their English becomes more effective, confident, and meaningful.
And that is why transparency truly matters. Not because it sounds impressive or professional, but because of what it creates over time. Transparency builds trust by showing people that they are respected enough to be informed, included, and spoken to honestly. When information is clear and intentions are open, people feel less anxious and more secure. Transparency also creates understanding. It helps people see the full picture instead of guessing or filling gaps with assumptions. When explanations are clear, misunderstandings decrease, conflicts become easier to resolve, and cooperation becomes more natural. People are more willing to listen when they feel they are not being misled. Over time, transparency leads to stability. In relationships, workplaces, and institutions, transparency reduces uncertainty and fear. People know what to expect, how decisions are made, and where they stand. This sense of stability allows individuals and groups to focus their energy on growth, learning, and collaboration instead of suspicion or confusion. For English learners, understanding this deeper meaning is important. Using the word transparency correctly is not only about vocabulary accuracy, it shows that you understand how language connects to trust, communication, and human behavior. When you use this word with awareness, your English sounds not only fluent but thoughtful and mature.
As we come to the end of this episode, I want to leave you with one simple idea. Transparency is not about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about being willing to explain, to clarify, and to take responsibility for how our words and actions affect others. Whether you're learning English, working with people, or building relationships, transparency makes communication safer and more human.
I agree, and I think what makes transparency powerful is that it's something we practice every day, often in small moments. When we explain our intentions, admit uncertainty, or say, "Let me clarify," we create space for trust. In language learning, this matters too. You don't need perfect English to be transparent. You just need honesty and effort.
Exactly. And if you're listening to this as an English learner, remember that using words like transparency correctly is not just about sounding advanced. It's about understanding how language reflects values. When your language becomes clearer, your thinking often becomes clearer too.
So take this word with you. Notice how it's used in news, in professional settings, and even in daily conversations. Try using it in your own sentences, not just to practice English, but to express ideas more thoughtfully.
Thank you for spending this time with us and learning slowly and deeply. If this episode helped you, stay with us for the next one. We're building vocabulary that connects language to real life.
We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, keep listening, keep reflecting, and keep growing.